Today, I'm announcing that we're introducing the Bitcoin for America Act, and this deals with codifying the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve Executive Order and eliminating capital gains tax if you want to pay your taxes with Bitcoin. Now, a lot of hold on for dear lifers are going to, why would I part with my Bitcoin? I understand the concern. You don't have to, but you can. I started paying attention to Bitcoin back in 2012, 2013 when it was under $200. But when I came to Congress in 2016, I think a Bitcoin was $500 or $600. And you would think over that time, when it's peaked as high as north of $120,000, that some of my colleagues would have said, this guy might be right about some of these things.
Yeah.
But Congress is pretty stubborn. They stay the course. But think about that in terms of what it could do for a country that's $38 trillion in debt. Think if the United States was accumulating Bitcoin since 2012.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to BPI's Spotlight Series. For our very first episode, we are so lucky to be joined by Congressman Warren Davidson of Ohio. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's an honor to join you. Thank you.
You've been really a trailblazer in Bitcoin policy on the Hill, from self-custody with the Keep Your Coins Act to de minimis tax exemptions for everyday payments with the Token Taxonomy Act. But we understand today you actually have a special announcement.
Yeah, today I'm announcing that we're introducing the Bitcoin for America Act, and this deals with codifying the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve Executive Order and, frankly, eliminating capital gains tax if you want to pay your taxes with Bitcoin. Now, a lot of hold on for dear lifers are going to, why would I part with my Bitcoin? I understand the concern. You don't have to, but you can.
Fascinating. This is a huge announcement. Very, very cool. Would love to just sort of dig right into the bill. So tell us a little bit about the overall structure, maybe how you came to this idea and the thinking behind it, and unpack it for us a bit.
Well, I'd like to give a little credit to Ohio, former treasurer in the state of Ohio, Josh Mandel. So when he was treasurer of our state, one of his parting acts was to try to make it so you could pay your Ohio taxes with Bitcoin. And they came in and said, well, you can't really do that. It's not legal. And they undid it. And then I was just talking about things recently, and I said, why couldn't we do that at the federal level? And okay, maybe you can't just do it with executive action like he tried in Ohio, but you could do it with a law. So why don't we just change the law? And this would be in line with what the administration's already said they want to build as a strategic Bitcoin reserve. You could do this in a deficit neutral way where people who already have Bitcoin could pay taxes with their Bitcoin. And frankly, people could say, you know what, I just want to pay my taxes in Bitcoin. So you could convert US dollars to Bitcoin and send your tax payments into the Treasury. And then your tax payments would go into the Treasury. If you're concerned about, say, well, I don't want my money going to foreign aid. Well, put it in the strategic Bitcoin reserve. It won't be spent at all. I don't want my money going to XYZ. Just pay in Bitcoin. It'll stay in the Treasury.
Wow, this is fascinating. And would this be available both for individuals and also corporate taxpayers?
That's the goal.
Wow. So this would potentially have a very large impact of the different people that could opt into this.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that I kind of hope to say is, look, I love the hold on for dear life mindset. But in a lot of ways, this is kind of taken away from the liquidity in Bitcoin. So the idea that it would be a permissionless payment system has kind of gone away because, in the early days, people parted with Bitcoin and they're like, wait, how much was that pizza? And so people are very reluctant to use it as a payment instrument. But here, the goal would be, well, let's create some liquidity with it. And it doesn't stay liquid once it goes into a strategic Bitcoin reserve, but it does facilitate the U.S. accumulation of Bitcoin.
Well, the payments is something that's very important. And I think the no capital gains would be a huge unlock where people might have been sitting on Bitcoin for a long time and they realize that they're going to have to make this payment either way. The tax payment's going to have to come due. So you might as well pay it in Bitcoin and know that it can go to a good place and go to a long-term savings. What do you think that the long-term impact of this could be for America's finances?
Well, one of the websites I like to refer people to is WTF happened in 1971.com. And it really, in essence, refers to August 15th of 1971 when Nixon broke the gold standard. And you look at what are the implications for the middle class? What's happened to the value, the purchasing power of your dollar? Well, it's gone down massively. So, when you look at the Federal Reserve and say their job is to preserve stable prices, I think what they heard was, we get to set interest rates. And they preserve interest rates, but they don't preserve the buying power of your money. The buying power of the dollar has gotten decimated. And so, to me, sound money is essential for defending freedom. And Bitcoin's premise is kind of a return to sound money, and in essence, separating money from the state. And look, a proper use of money does what is laid out in the Bitcoin white paper. It's a stable store of value, an efficient means of exchange, and you don't need an intermediary. I think one of the big things, privacy is probably the most infringed part of the Bill of Rights right now. And money is increasingly designed as a surveillance system. And if you link digital ID with central bank digital currency, it essentially becomes the creepiest surveillance tool known to man, and a tool for coercion and control. So here, if you can create a future for money, and I think this is one of the most important policy debates that we're having, that preserves the characteristics of cash, but has the utility of being digital, so you can move money at the speed of light. Look, no government granted people the right to transact, right? It predates government. So the government shouldn't be able to infringe your right to transact without due process, probable cause, a warrant, subpoena, et cetera. Money is increasingly infringed that way, and there are increasingly calls to do even more infringing. So if it worked beautifully, it would be a pivot towards a future of sound money in the United States.
And the great thing about this bill is that it is an opt-in system, right? Every American can basically make the choice at the end of the year when they're making their payment, do I want to contribute to the Bitcoin reserve? And in that way, it is a really novel policy suggestion to say, this is a democratic decision, right? Every individual can choose to contribute. So, we at BPI, we love this concept of, can we have like a grassroots building of the reserve where the different individuals and companies can kind of choose to contribute to that. So very, very cool. I wanted to ask you, if someone said, is this going to be diverting tax dollars that otherwise would go to the Treasury's general account? Is that going to be a negative? How do you think about that sort of shift in payments and the dollars coming in?
Well, I think that could be one of the reasons people, maybe even people who don't currently own Bitcoin, or maybe they have a lot of Bitcoin, why would they want to pay in Bitcoin? Well, that would be a way of sending a clear message to the government. We actually do want a smaller government. So you guys keep campaigning on that, but then you don't do it. So, here, if you're putting the money in the reserve, yeah, we're funding the US government, but you're also saying, quit wasting my money. Keep it as a stable store of value. Don't squander it on things that, like whether you're for Ukraine or not, the idea that you didn't want an inspector general to make sure that the funds we sent to Ukraine were spent for the cause, why would that be? If you look at some of the things on fraud, waste, and abuse that have been exposed, there are a lot of people that are frustrated with that kind of status quo, and it'd be a way to send a message while complying with the law. I owe my taxes, but you could also say, yeah, I owe my taxes, and I don't want to completely, break the law. But this would be a way to say, yeah, let's talk about what kind of government we ought to have. And I think there are a lot of people that want way less government and far more freedom.
And one of the provisions, as I understand it, is there's a long-term savings provision. So the Bitcoin has to be held for a long period of time. Is that right?
Yeah, 20 years.
That's great. And so how do you think that younger generations will see this? I know that a lot of people in Gen Z, they're saying, look, America doesn't have the finances for me. I'm not sure if Social Security is going to be there. How do you think that this new type of savings account could play into that discussion?
Yeah, I mean, the goal is to shore up the solvency of the United States, and how do you change the paradigm of we've created a system with the way the Federal Reserve just cares about the interest rate and not the buying power of the dollar, where when we have massive fiscal deficits, they hold rates down or they grow their balance sheet. That creates artificial demand for U.S. Treasuries, and it facilitates really the theft of inflation. So if you think about like right now. We collect about $5 trillion worth of taxes or quote revenue if you're the government, and then you spend about $7 trillion. And if you just think of this as like a big jug, and you have 5 gallons of water in it, and you take the 5 gallons out, and then you pour 7 gallons back in, well, of course you've raised the level. I mean, inherently, you're doing that in the economy. So you're inherently juicing the economy. It's inflation, right? You're growing the money supply, which is decreasing the value of any one given dollar. So, we have to be able to get at that. And not everybody can articulate that. No one really wants to. They want to get on with their lives, but they do know their money's worth less. And they also know that, promises like Social Security, this is supposed to go insolvent between 2030 and 2034. And, people are like, well, that isn't going to be there for me. And I always tell people, like, look, don't worry, we'll close the Department of Defense first. There's no way we're cutting Social Security. And if you look at, that's the problem with the mindset is, well, we can't cut anything. I mean, we barely had the votes as Republicans to defund NPR, right? And they're clearly not aligned with Republicans on any given issue. I think their editorial board of 60 people had 0 Republicans, 0 right of center. If you include Republicans in the center, they had plenty of people that might have been right of the center of the Democratic Party, but nobody who would be considered a Republican in that mix. And we could barely defund that. So, I mean, I think Rand Paul's done a nice job of pointing out that the main difference between the Republican plan and the Democrat plan is they lead to the same crash site. It's just a difference. Democrats maybe have the express train to the crash site, but they're both creating massive fiscal deficits.
Yeah, this is something that we talk a lot about at BPI, which is the nature of the problem is so dire that we've made all of these promises, and that if you just do the math, it simply doesn't add up. And that's why we need to look for outside the box thinking. We need to look to, can we use new technologies? So I think this is a great way to think of what is a way we can be innovative, we can be on the cutting edge, and hopefully resolve some of that tension that we've sort of accidentally stepped into and now it's difficult to get out of. I'm curious what your thoughts are on this bill's effect for the United States as a legal jurisdiction. Obviously, if this passed, then the U.S. would maybe be a signal worldwide that we're a pro-Bitcoin jurisdiction, that we want to attract Bitcoiners here. What do you think the consequences for that would be on industry and sort of global competition?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at El Salvador, they recognize Bitcoin, and that was a key for Bukele's shift in his ability to maintain stable government there, as he was dealing with lots of changes within society for El Salvador. And they created far less crime. It's a much safer country, and with a safer country and a destination for capital, they've really done well for a very small country. If you look at the United States, I mean, we have like 5% of the world's population, but we have 25% of the world's GDP. We have roughly 50% of the world's invested capital. Our capital markets are robust, but increasingly, particularly under the Biden administration, you saw digital assets fleeing the country. A lot of folks with Bitcoin were looking elsewhere. And this would be a total sea change. I mean, President Trump's administration came in with great executive orders, and I think that's been, the right signal. Congress passed a stablecoin bill, which is like 7% of the market. Hopefully we'll get the other 93% included and deal with a better regulatory framework. But when you look at Bitcoin in particular, just as the president's executive order on the strategic Bitcoin reserve recognized, it is kind of a standalone asset. It is, not crypto per se. And, the idea of having one custodian at the federal level makes sense because you had all these federal agencies that didn't even really know what they were doing with the digital assets, and some of whom lost the private keys or claimed they lost the private keys. What really happened to this? There wasn't really oversight and accountability of the digital assets. So this made sense to consolidate it under the Secretary of the Treasury. And what they said is, hey, if it's not Bitcoin, we're open to selling it off and we'll use the money for that to buy Bitcoin. But we really don't intend to sell Bitcoin. We want to hold that and accumulate it. So this is a way to do that in a deficit neutral way, as the executive order promised. And I think that's going to say, if I've got Bitcoin, why wouldn't I want to live within the U.S. jurisdiction and be able to have a place that recognizes really Bitcoin as money?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is a very important discussion. I mean, we take Fort Knox for granted. We have top of the line security. We have gold in these very, very secure bunkers all around the country. Fort Knox just being one of the locations. And we should make sense to have the same thing for Bitcoin, to treat it as, the next type of gold, the next digital gold. and to secure it in a way that, is worthy of what the asset is itself. I think it's especially timely. I don't know if you saw the Cambodia seizure where they seized 127,000 Bitcoins from a Cambodian scamming ring. But this seems like very top of mind, that we should be getting this done. And we should make sure that it's stored away somewhere. We don't want this in someone's desk on a random hardware wallet, but it should be, really professionalized. That's fantastic. Another thing I would say is that this is really a step that should have been taken a long time ago. There have been a lot of people that have suggested this for payments and lots of different things, but we did some back testing, some financial analysis on this bill, and if only 1% of the population had been paying their taxes in Bitcoin, based on BPI's estimates, that could result in hundreds of billions of dollars in net savings. I guess, how much savings do you think this could be over the next 20 years?
Well, it certainly depends on the price of Bitcoin, right? So like when I got elected to Congress, one of the first things I started working on was the Token Taxonomy Act and trying to get some of this de minimis exemption and clarity and in terms of regulatory framework for the space. I started paying attention to Bitcoin back in 2012, 2013 when it was under $200. Mm-hmm. But when I came to Congress in 2016, I think a Bitcoin was $500 or $600. And you would think over that time, when it's peaked as high as north of $120,000, that some of my colleagues would have said, this guy might be right about some of these things.
Yeah.
But Congress is pretty stubborn. They stay the course. But think about that in terms of what it could do for a country that's $38 trillion in debt. Think if the United States was accumulating Bitcoin since 2012. This would be a tremendous thing. And look, a lot of people in the Bitcoin space in particular, and some of the others have done okay, but Bitcoin in particular have just created truly life-changing wealth because they decided, even for small amounts, to say, look, I don't have a lot of savings, but instead of putting, $50 or $100 a week in a regular savings account or setting it aside in a coffee can or under the mattress, I'm going to buy Bitcoin. And that has truly changed people's lives because they've been doing it for a decade now.
And what I love about this is that, this is a fundamentally American concept. What has made America great over the centuries is we've gotten there first. We've seen what the future is going to look like, and we were the first to innovate. We were the first to build out this massive rail network. We were the first to acquire Alaska and get all of the oil benefits from that. We had the Louisiana Purchase. I mean, we have this great history of taking, a bet on ourselves that we see where the future's going and we can build towards that. So it seems like this is really in line with a lot of those historical precedents. This is the way Americans have historically been very successful when times are tough.
Yeah, and I think one of the things too that you might look at, for businesses, if you look at some spare computing power, maybe more and more of them would just do mining or run a node, and if they accumulate a little bit of Bitcoin that way, for extra energy consumption. If you look at energy companies, just the burn off of natural gas coming out of wells, for example, creative people trying to capture methane and other kinds of things. So it is, conservation is a smart thing, and every way that you can get the lowest possible cost of energy is motivated towards investment in mining operations. And look at how short-sighted it was for China to kick all the mining operations out. That's been great for the United States. We were at least not stupid, where there was a point in time where some of the people in the industry who were trying to kill proof of work and trying to prevent mining, and now that's kind of gone by the wayside as you've seen massive investment in AI. You've saw a lot of people stop talking about, proof of work is somehow using all the energy. Now they want to build whole nuclear reactors to run artificial intelligence. What kind of buried down in there is it's been great for miners in the United States. And, this is a way for, whether it's individuals or corporations to say, look, if you want to plan ahead for your tax, why not just run a node at least, if not put a little miner off?
Yeah, I think that America really was a very attractive jurisdiction after the China ban. And now we're seeing the fruits of that labor, which is these AI data centers, they need a lot of power. Bitcoin miners have already got the power contracts. And then in some cases, I'm even hearing they can be used as sort of a demand response system for the data center, where they're able to sort of suck up the extra energy when the data center is not needing it in the moment. And the Bitcoin can sort of be this nice balancing act on the data center. Curious where your thoughts are for the future of this bill. So you're introducing it today. And what are your prospects for what you think this could look like for the rest of the Congress?
Well, the hope is that, we get a lot of publicity for it. I think, I think the politics on this are going to be great. I think the policy is right. It takes both those things to get everything to come together. The jurisdiction is through Ways and Means, so we'll work to get Ways and Means to at least notice it for a hearing where it's subject to Q&A for some of the witnesses, and then we'll see where it goes. Hopefully, we build momentum in it, and working for a dance partner in the Senate. I kind of had hoped to kind of co-introduce it with someone in the Senate, but hopefully before Christmas we'll get a Senate companion, and we can get momentum on it. I think this is something the administration is going to love. They've already put executive orders around the same ideas here, and I'm very hopeful that this can build some true momentum and get done this Congress.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And for everyone watching, that's the Bitcoin for America Act. It's been a pleasure having you on, and we're really excited to see where this goes, and look forward to supporting you. Keep up the great work.
Thanks a lot. Tell your congressman to get on this bill, Bitcoin for America.
That's right. You heard it here.